coming on to 60. I've been very, very successful in business, entrepreneur, been self-employed all my life. I currently a chairman and CEO of a publicly listed company in the US called CIO, which is CYIO. That's the ticker. Um, which is in medical supplies, which is a very different part of the business world that I've been in previous times. Um, but I really did struggle at school. I had a major difficulty with reading and writing through school. And that took me to write, after I left school, I wrote my first book on dyslexia called Dyslexia, How Do We Learn? And that was through the trauma of not being very good at school. And we can go back to that because I know this is just the introduction. So now, later on in life, with all the successes and failures, four beautiful children, and being able to travel the world and really experience life, I had a trauma again in regards to my wife and I separating, and that really triggered a very, very major event in my life to really dig down and to look at the roller coaster ride that people with ADHD and dyslexia have, and the effect that that roller coaster has on other people that are surrounding you that you don't necessarily recognize at the time. So with that, I ended up writing my next book, which is called Neo Spicy, which is here. And we've already worked out that my spelling's not the greatest, but the Neo Spicy is NEUROSPICY.life, and you can look at the background on myself and the book. There's a sample there that you can read for free, or you can buy it online. It's not expensive. So yeah, that's the background of where we're at. So we can delve into the education, we can delve into a whole lot of arrays of information. What you can just dig as deep as you like, and I'll share everything with you. So there's nothing to hide.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that because I don't know many people that have suffered or that are experiencing, my apologies, ADHD or dyslexia. So, for those who may not know what it is, can you shed some light on what is ADHD and dyslexia?
Okay, so I'll start with ADHD. ADHD is attention deficit disorder. Now, that may seem like a really good description because people with ADHD are usually very distracted. They find it difficult to sit in a particular spot. Focus is extremely difficult. They're always going off into different tangents and so forth. But the real way it should be described is not as ADHD or attention deficit disorder. It's actually an overload of information. So why I say that is that what's happening is that instead of you thinking like a linear person, or let's say you're a maths or a science, or you're a teacher or you're a doctor, you're able to very much focus in a vertical space. And so therefore you're able to, concentrate for a large period of time. You're allowed to draw information in. People with ADHD find that very difficult because there's thousands of bits of information coming to you simultaneously. So it's like your brain is like a V8 engine, it's revving and firing off in all of different directions, but it doesn't have any brakes. So it is a very, very difficult thing to deal with because that's also very, very tiring, that you're continually in this state of perpetual thought. And it's not just a thought that are concentrated thoughts, they're random thoughts. And so you get very easily distracted. So from that point of view, it is a negative. But from the positive of that is you have an enormous amount of energy. When you do become focused on something that you like and that you're passionate about, you can become very hyper focused, like extremely focused. Um, and so therefore it has both a negative and a positive connotation to it. Then if we throw dyslexia into that, and dyslexia is Latin for difficulty with English, and you could pretty much be dis anything, dis mathematic, dis driving, dis community, it doesn't really matter. It's just a Latin word for difficulty with English. That again is probably one very small aspect of dyslexia. Dyslexia is you get your words back to front, you spell incorrectly the same word probably 10 times in a different paragraph. and you won't physically see that you've actually spelt the word wrong. What you see is actually the correct word. So you don't pick it up. When you're reading bits of information off the page, it's not going in. And so that information coming off the page is misinterpreted or misunderstood or not taken in at all. And then the reverse happens when you write down information on the page, it comes out all jointed, disconnected, and you're only really getting half the information. So there's all of this negative component when you can imagine at school, you're trying to read and write and do these things. So you have these major blocks. But then again, like ADHD, you have also this superpower. And the superpower is that you can think laterally, like laterally on about I call it about 8 levels simultaneously. I can think of about something. So instead of a normal person when you come in, you might think, okay, well that's a red hat. I'll be thinking cap, hat, beanie, all of these different components around that hat, and then I'll be able to take it to the next level, the next level. So to give you an example, NASA employs 50% of its employees are dyslexic. And yeah, I know this is an amazing stat, right? I never would have thought of that. No one's ever told me at school. All I was told at school was, you're stupid, you can't read, you're dumb, you can't write, all that sort of stuff, you can't spell. Imagine if they had been saying, oh, by the way, because you're dyslexic, we're going to basically gear you to work with, one of the most famous organizations in the world, NASA. The reason they do that is because they're actually being put into situations which is very new, and they have to be lateral. They have to be able to think outside the box. So if we take that as an example and say, okay, we've got the education system, which is pretty much a vertical, straight line educational process. So the educators that are teaching the stuff, they all got it. They all understood how it worked. Then you've got people that are outside the box, like myself and other people that may struggle and not cope. Doesn't necessarily mean they're all dyslexic, just means that they process information differently. But yet, if we look at all of the entrepreneurs in the world, around about 40% of them are dyslexic. So, you look at very famous musicians, they're dyslexic. Very famous actors are dyslexic. And there's thousands of them that are lists that are very, very successful. One of the things that I've written with this book is to say I'm not overly successful and not a world name, known name. Um, but at the same time, is that there's millions and millions of people like me and like others that are out there that are just struggling with it every day, that have not necessarily achieved. People say, well, it's amazing you've written a book and it's amazing you've had all these businesses and these startups and all that sort of stuff. But, I'm not a household name like a lot of the people that are dyslexic that are very famous because of their achievements. There is then a massive amount of people underneath that. And if you think about it, that if 40% of most entrepreneurs are dyslexic, what an amazing thing. And look at the things they've all achieved. It is really, so that's the superpower of it, that you have this amazing ability to think laterally. So you can design things, you can create things, you can see things that maybe other people don't see, other solutions and other paths, which is fantastic. But at the same time, it's also your kryptonite because you live in a world where you can't read properly, you can't write properly, you can't spell properly, you get things backwards, you're interpreting information sometimes the right way, sometimes the wrong way. So I call it like a superpower like Superman, but you've also got this kryptonite. And the difficulty is a lot of people like myself fall into the trap. They recognize the superpower, but they also become lazy and allow the kryptonite to sneak in. And that's what falls us into these depressions or bad habits, not managing this skill that we have because it can be very absorbing. So I've got the full mixed grill, so to speak, where I've got everything on the smorgasbord. I've got ADHD and dyslexia. So all of those things must be really managed. And it comes down to meditation, studying, being healthy to the best of our abilities that we can. I still like to drink and all that sort of stuff. But doing the things that are making you more productive than non-productive. Like I used to smoke a lot of marijuana. And that was because I used to self-medicate with that. And I used to think that was good because it used to calm me down. but it was actually a negative because I don't need to be calmed down. I just need to be able to focus and then say, okay, at times it's okay that you get things wrong. It's okay that I spelt the website wrong. It's okay that I forget to turn up to a meeting, and don't be so hard on yourself. That's where I've started to learn. And that's what the book's about, these stories of how dyslexia or ADHD got me into a certain situation and then how I dealt with those situations and how they became very, very positive influences on my life. So, yeah. So I hope
I'm
that's
glad
not
you sh Sorry, go ahead.
too long of an explanation for it, but I think it gives it a
No,
bit
they're
of.
here to hear you speak. They're not here to hear me speak, my friend. So keep on
Right.
talking. And when you mentioned superhero, I immediately thought about the superhero effect where there's a group of children who are struggling with their performance. And one way what they did is they asked the students, the children, who is your favorite superhero? Some
Yeah.
said Batman, some said Superman, some said Wonder Woman, some said Captain America,
Yeah.
Supergirl. And as they donned this persona of this superhero, their performance improved. They felt more confident. They believed in themselves. So when you said superhero, it immediately made me think of that because although someone with ADHD, someone with dyslexia, someone with something else, someone without something else, is maybe living a different experience day to day, it doesn't diminish that there could be a superhero in their own right. Would you agree?
No, I totally agree. But, and this is very, very important, as a parent of four children and as someone that's struggled with this situation, would I wish it on anyone? No, I wouldn't actually wish being ADHD and dyslexia on anyone. But I am so happy that I am. So that's that superpower thing. I want to be normal. I wanted to be the normal kid in class. I wanted to be able to just survive and not be, this person that was crazy or did these things and then has gone off to achieve these sort of things. Now, later in life, yes. But the issue that really comes home is, and you talked about kids that were feeling negative. If you're continually told in an environment, and not just once or twice, but you're told every day that you're a failure in that system, eventually that becomes very, very heavy to carry. And you carry that really, really like a badge. And so there's two ways that people then react with that. You either fight or you flight. And I was a fighter. So I got into trouble. I was always disruptive. I was always a nuisance in the class because what I was trying to do is survive in this environment where everything was negative. So, you either miss the bus, it starts the day negative because you didn't read the time on the clock correctly, you took the wrong corner, whatever the things are, they continually build up. Then you get to class, you forget your book, you then get your marks back and it's all covered in red ink, and this is just before recess, and so you've had like 5 or 6 failure events. Then you get to lunch, and by the time you get home from school, but guess what? They send you back and you do this every day for how many years. That's a very, very difficult stigma to come out of. And that's why you'll find a lot of people with dyslexia, not so much ADHD. ADHD has a different stigma to it. It's almost like everyone wants to be ADHD these days. But dyslexia has a different spin to it because it comes with you can't read and write, you can't, spell, you can't do these things. Where ADHD just means you're a little bit, off the spectrum. If you carry that guilt of that not being able to do it all the way through life. And that's why you find a lot of these very successful entrepreneurs will not admit that they're dyslexic publicly. It takes them a long time to get to that. Richard Branson, for an example, took a long time to tell everyone that he was dyslexic. And he's one of the most successful business people. And you can go through all of them, Ben Lexon, the Albert Einstein. There's so many of them all that are dyslexic. But it took them a long time to become public about it because it is a stigma and people do look at you differently because you don't do things the normal way. That's a very important thing for the parents to understand, that their children need to be encouraged that they do have this superpower and they are different. They are spicy. They are neuro different. Okay. And that's not a negative. We're not all Rain Man and we can, drop a box of matches and count them. But there are di different things that we can do that make us really, that's the bit you've got to find, especially for parents looking that are listening and they're looking at their child and going, you know, Johnny or Pete can't read and write very well. He can't do this very well. He can't do that. But look at the things that he can or she can do well. Why is it that they can do that? And why is it that when they're doing that, they can really concentrate? And so sometimes we're putting kids into environments and positions that continually make them fail because we haven't actually just said, hey, let's just take a backward step here and say, does it really matter that he's reading a book about Shakespeare? If he's really keen about surfing or football or something, isn't it okay that he just reads something about that or a comic book as long as they're reading? And I think we get lost with the fact is that we must do what the education system says we have to do. And yet, if you look at the education system like a business, and let's just say that business was building a stereo. The education system was building a stereo. And a stereo has a woofer and a tweeter and it has, a CD player and a radio and all of that. And then we look at the education system and say, but the education system now fails. 30% of its students come out that are illiterate, that can't read and write. They're basically illiterate. Not meaning that they're stupid, just means they can't read and write. So if that was a production company building a stereo, they would be out of business. Yet the education system still survives being able to produce students that they're not able to connect with. And that's because they don't look at it from an alternative view. They're looking at it because they were very good at school, they went to university, and they then became teachers. So they survived in that environment. They're not like me or other students. So therefore, they don't recognize and they don't know, and they're not taught, they don't get given the skills to look at this other 30%. Where if you're in business and your stereo didn't work and the radio, you would have technicians looking at it and you would fix it to make sure that the next run went out that it did work. That's fundamentally where I feel that the education system fails us, which then in turn gives a lot of pressure to students and parents that their child is not going along the path that they should be from grade one to grade two to grade three. And then all of a sudden they start falling off and then they're labeled, you know, dyslexic or, the other terms which are probably not appropriate to use these days. But when we were younger, that's what I got called, a lot of nicknames and, and it was derogatory stuff. But sometimes you wore it with a badge because you knew that you could think differently, but you just didn't know how to present it in that environment. So,
One of the problems I've been able to identify with some of the people that I know who have children that are experiencing or living life this way is they would share that there was a little bit of a sense or feeling of shame and guilt, not necessarily because they didn't want their children. The question was asked of themselves, or maybe they asked by others, how would people view me because my child is this way? And someone gave me the example that she was being blamed, well, her and her husband were being blamed that because they weren't good people, this was a consequence of their actions. And I would ask you then, since you've gone through this and you've had this journey, what are some of the ways that maybe parents and even children can build up resiliency to maybe others who may not understand what they're going through or outright don't respect it?
and it's really interesting. And you'll see in the book, I put my school reports in there. John doesn't concentrate. John's got no future. He's going to be a tradesman. It was very, very rough language. And it was very derogatory, basically saying John's a loser and, he really is not going to survive in the education system. Get him out and get him starting to dig holes. And you can't really fight that. But if I look back at that person now, I feel sorry for that person because they got taught really basic stuff, yet they were in charge of teaching whole years, years and years of kids, but they didn't take the effort and energy to go and look at it from an alternative point of view. And the thing is that the people that are making those criticisms and that are pointing the finger, my old philosophy is that there's three fingers pointing back. I'm sure they've got lots and lots of issues with themselves. Okay. And why would you point out that finger? But from the parents and the students' point of view, it comes back to this, what is it you can do well? So I'm going to give you an example. So I could not read and write till I was 24. Like I'm talking, couldn't read and write at all. And I was coming back from Canada. I'd been skiing in Canada. I was successful. I was 24, and I was coming through an immigration office and coming back into America, I think, before I flew back. And the immigration person asked me to fill in the immigration card. And I filled in the French side. That's how bad I was at 24. You know, I had money in the bank. I was skiing. I was, Whistler and Blackcomb back in the day before they were, one mountain, heli skiing, all that sort of stuff. And when I went back, the guy said, "Oh, look, go and fill it in again." I went back into the queue, filled it in again. And when I handed it back to the lady, she belittled me and said, "My 4-year-old son could fill this in better than you." And here I am going, "You have no idea who I am. You have no idea. All you are, to me, all you are is a customs officer. Like you have not achieved anything. You have not gone far up in the ranks of life." Um, but at the same time, what I did was my reaction was too overweighted, and what I did was I lost my temper, lost my control, and I started yelling and screaming, "How dare you say this?" I got locked up. I came back to Australia, and I was speaking to some people. I said, "John, we've got this lady that we believe that is modern and new in the way in which we can teach people how to read and write." And it was kinesthetic learning. I don't know if you know a lot about kinesthetics, but it's part of the body and how we all intertwine with the planets and vibrations and all that sort of stuff. So when I sat down with her, she said, and this is a really getting back to the point, is how do you learn? What are the kids good at? How do we find out what they're good at? So I couldn't read and write. And she said, "Okay, describe something to me that you're really good at." And I said, "Okay, I've just been skiing." So I described skiing. She said, "Okay, describe skiing in a whiteout where you can't see anything." So I describe that and how I can feel the tips of my skis and feel it up through my legs and I can absorb it. And you don't go as fast, but I can ski in a whiteout. He goes, "Okay, now describe hanging off a chairlift by one arm." And I just sat there. I said, I can't. She goes, "Because you learn by doing. You physically have to do it to learn. You can't read it. You can't be told it. Okay. You can see it, but you physically have to learn it. So you'll learn by your body doing something." And when she sat there and she said, "We're going to teach you to read and write by doing." So for an example, a phone box in Australia is a red phone box and it looks a certain shape and has a certain stuff. So you're going to look at the phone box and we're going to look at the letters. We're not going to learn how to spell the word. You're just going to visualize it. And if you have to, you can go into the phone box and physically be in there and learn the word in the phone box. And so we learn a very, very limited number of words, like car, truck, basically going back to the basics. But by physically seeing it and being a part of that word was the way I learned. And now I can, although, I'd probably have 80% correct, I still make lots of mistakes, but I wouldn't class myself as illiterate now at all, and I'm now writing my second book or written my second book. So yeah, but at the same time, I learned to learn that way. And so no one had ever done that. And so like to learn to do cooking, I can't do it out of a recipe. I can't read it because I don't see, I miss the bits and, you got to add this and add that and I'm being distracted. But once I learn to do it, like I can cook very well now, but each time I do it, it'll be a little bit different. It won't be exactly the same because that's just who I am. And that is part of that journey. So that learning by recognizing how you learn is really important. And for the kids or the parents or the adults that are still struggling, what is it you're good at? You know, why can you do your shoelaces up? Why can you get dressed? Why can you do this? Why can you do that? How did you learn to do that? And if that you can then translate that back, and sometimes it's very difficult to find out what you're good at and how you can do it. Like I was very good at sport, but that was something you physically did. So that came naturally to me. Skiing, rock climbing, paddling, surfing, all of those things. But you did it 100 times until you started to learn to do it. That's the same as reading and writing. That's all I did was I just visualized it. Same with phone numbers. It's just patterns to me. I don't know the number. If you ask me to read it out aloud without looking at the phone, I couldn't do it. But if I'm looking at the phone, it's just a pattern. So yeah, so that's how we sort of look at improving it by looking at it from another angle. And the people that are criticizing you, I just feel sorry for them.
I will say that you would have to feel sorry for them because it's annoying and you may be even hurt. But I think part of the problem that so many people encounter is they have a specific view based on maybe what they're told. Many cases, not even what they understand. They hear of someone who has ADHD and they think they have to look a certain way. They see someone with dyslexia, same thing. They see someone with depression, same thing. So many people are unable to see past the imagery that is generated in their mind because of maybe what they see on the TV or online or things like that.
Yeah.
What are some of the myths about having ADHD or dyslexia that you want to debunk and say these aren't actually true?
Well, interesting question. In fact, I've not been asked that question before, so you're really making me think. The first one is we're not lazy. We're actually completely the opposite. But that's the label, attention deficit disorder. That means you can't concentrate. If most people had the thoughts that I had all the time and the amount of energy I'm using to concentrate and not get off tangent here in this conversation is insane. Like I'll probably have to go and have a lie down because I'm really concentrating, right? So we're not lazy. That's the first thing. And the fact is that we do get things like mixed up and we do get distracted and we do get all of these sorts of things happening. But a lot of that comes out because the fact is we're just grabbing what we think is right at that particular time in that junction. Like when you go to make a decision, you usually get an opportunity left or right. You're going to make a good decision or a bad decision. And sometimes we make good decisions, sometimes we make bad decisions. Sometimes that's related to our ADHD and dyslexia. Sometimes it's just because of our environment and the way in which we were brought up. Um, but it is a very, very difficult to demist all of the different characteristics because there's so many different levels. So if we were to turn around and say, you know, you're very good at music, but doesn't mean that you can play music and read it off the sheets. You might be able to play by ear. There's a whole different ways. And so dyslexia and ADHD, I believe, is exactly the same. There's different levels. And so my kids, for an example, all claim to be dyslexic because they were just lazy. They just didn't want to do the homework, right? Oh, I'm dyslexic, Dad. No, you're not. You're not at all because you can read better than me, um, and write better than me. It's just that particular. So there's that whole thing of the stigma of what level you are. So, if out of 10, I'm probably an 8 on both, but some people may be a lot more dyslexic than me or ADHD than me. And don't forget is some people can just be ADHD and some people can just be dyslexic. You don't get the both. They have very similar traits, but they're very, very different. Very, very different. And I think one of the things that I think is sad, and I come on it and off it every now and then, but only in the last 2 years have I been diagnosed enough to be able to go on to Ritalin or one of the drugs. And I think that is to me probably the saddest thing is that we're actually turning around and saying, well, this is a problem. Johnny's got a problem. He doesn't concentrate in class, so therefore let's drug him. And I think that is an easy cop out way of doing it. Initially, when I went into the almost depression and so forth, it helped a lot because it was calming me down. But now I rarely take it, and yet people love to take it because it's an easy fix. Where the fix I have is I meditate, go to the gym, try and eat healthily, focus on being present at the time with the people you're with and concentrating on and not getting distracted by, little things that are flying around. So it's a difficult one, but look, there's lots of myths to it. Some of it's true, some of it's not true, but everyone's different. So I can't really say that those experiences for someone else is not true when I might not have that experience.
You mentioned your children, and then you mentioned that you've worked with them and you've helped them. For those who are in their adult life and they're experiencing ADHD, they're living a life with dyslexia, from your perspective, how did that impact your relationships as you grew into adulthood?
Yeah, and one of the things is like with the children, as I said before we got on recording, I took all the children out of private school and we went to the Green School in Indonesia, which is probably the one of the most environmental, progressive education systems in the world. And I really decided that's what we want to do. And here's somebody that hated the education system, still hates it, failed in it, but was so determined to get the best education for my children. My second eldest was there, but he was struggling in the classroom, struggling whether it was social, whether it was just he didn't want to be there. So we set up our own independent school, but everything was around surfing. So every subject related to surfing, and you're sitting there going, well, how can you do maths and science and geography related to surfing? So all the books were surfing, all the maths, science, everything was surfing. So I'll give you an example. So if you build a surfboard, you need math, right? You need to work out where the fins go. You need to get the dimensions, you know. So they were designing surfboards. But the practical examples I think that really came home to me was that they had to work out the paddle strokes from one end of the beach to the other. And they mathematically had to work it out. Now they had to work out their power, how long their arms were compared to other kids in the class, and all that sort of stuff. And they had to work it all out. But then they went and practically tested it. Now, when my son came back into the education system, he was advanced or more advanced than a lot of the kids that were still doing the normal stuff that he was doing. The reason was because he was passionate. He was very, very passionate about surfing, and we were giving him an environment that he wanted to learn. He wanted to go to school because he was being, and that's part of the problem with the education system. But if you come into business, you know, now we've got ChatGPT, calculators, you've got answering services, you've got all these technology that you can use. And I'd say use them all. Become very, very good at taking the shortcut to make sure that you're using technology to the best of your ability. Don't be scared of technology just because it's something that you may have not been very good at when you were younger. You know, I remember when I worked for a job, I couldn't use the cash register, just couldn't work it out. You know, but now that's a really, really important thing. I don't leave anything to chance. Every time I have a thought or anything, I text or I put in notes or I set up an appointment for it to remind me that I've got to go and do that. So then it comes up and goes, oh, and guess what? 50% of the time I won't do it, right? Because I'm ADHD and dyslexia. I'm going to get distracted. I know, but then I just move it. I just keep moving it in the calendar. So that's one of the things that we really should be using is people like ourselves getting hold of as much technology as you possibly can, making it work for you, like voiceover with your typing, all that sort of stuff. Use it all as much as possible, which I didn't have. You know, back in the day when I started, we had fax machines and secretaries typing the letters for you. So yeah.
I remember using a typewriter, even though it wasn't from my time. And I'll be honest with you, John, I was like, what the hell is this? But thank God I could type about, at the time, 60 words a minute. But you make a
Right.
mistake, you gotta white it out, right? There's no
That's right.
backspace, there's nothing like that. So I remember those days.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the old days when we used to make a phone call, you know, you go round and round, and then you get distracted. Oh, bugger, you have to go all the way back to the start. You know, we had little black books with our phone numbers written in them, you know, because it wasn't like today, if you lost your phone, you wouldn't know anyone's phone number. You know, back in the day, I probably would remember 10 phone numbers, you know, your work, your friends, your girlfriends, your home, and you had them all. It was just a pattern. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how times moved? But I think too the better. I think technology is a godsend for people like myself. It's something that everyone should really focus on and study AI. You know, there's all the negative and the positives about AI, but it's not going to affect 99% of us. Use it. Use it as much as you can and get to know it. And I think that's one of the things with people with ADHD and dyslexia is they don't study it enough. They don't study the advantages and the disadvantages and really understand it. So if you're a sports person or you're a tennis player or you're in drama, you do an enormous amount of research. You know, if you're playing an actor, then you go and research who that person is that you're acting or going to play. We've got to do that with this. and you do that, then you can start to recognize as the advantages and disadvantages. And that's what I've done. And a bit of that comes out in the book. Not a lot, because I'm not there to lecture. I'm not there to, oh, do this. And, I hate that stuff where you get online and, if you eat these foods, you won't have ADHD. And if you do this, it'll fix your ADHD or dyslexia. No, we're not broken. That's the problem. We're not broken. We're perfectly fine. We just think of things and do things a little bit differently.
So when someone is trying to, let me take a step back. For those who are getting into maybe a friendship or romantic relationship with someone that has ADHD or dyslexia, what are, from the outside looking in, what are some suggestions that you can give to us so we can be better equipped to assist and maybe not hurt innocently our
And it
partners?
is, and it is without a doubt, that is a very difficult position to be in on the other side. And I've recognized that whether it's my kids, whether it's relationships that I've got, whether it's, romantic relationships and so forth, that's a very difficult thing to be on the other side. And I think that one of the things that, especially ADHD and dyslexic people, is don't be confrontational about it because they're going to arc up because their whole world has been confrontational. And so if you've continually looked at as a failure and looked at as somebody that has been, not achieving, and then all of a sudden your partner, your girlfriend is going, you're an idiot, you shouldn't do that. I can guarantee you 99.9% they're going to bark up and they're going to react in a negative way because that's just another person criticizing them. And that's probably the number one thing that I've had to really struggle with. It's not criticism, it's just suggestions, but we take it as massive criticism because that's our world that we've been living in. And so that would be the number one. Sit down, understand, and also then try and dissect what it is that they're actually trying to say. Because I can tell you it's not coming across in a negative way. They're not trying to be negative. They're not trying to be, confusing. It's just the way they think. And so if you can try and dissect, now you said this, what do you mean? Instead of it being, you said that you're an idiot because you're just not getting anywhere. What do you mean by that? Can you help me understand what it is that you're trying to say? Those open-ended types of ways of communicating with people like ourselves is very important. And you won't get the confrontation because otherwise you will get a lot of confrontation. And I've had a lot of that, whether it's my friends or whoever, because you feel that they don't understand you and you feel that you're going back into that classroom. And there's years of angst being drawn up. And the first thing they're going to do is they're going to retaliate. And I'm not talking about violence retaliation. I'm just talking, psychological. They get moody. I used to get really moody and close off. Oh, you don't understand, you don't know what you're talking about, and just walk off. And so that's that reaction of, okay, I'm trying to survive. And it was usually because the person talking to you was saying something that was negative or didn't understand it and was being confrontational, not in a mean way, just in a, what are you talking about? I don't understand what you're talking about, mate. If really simple, that's a reaction would then go, oh, you think I'm stupid. So they're the two biggest ones. One, try and dissect what's actually being said and no confrontation.
And it all goes back to make sure you can communicate properly and don't
Yeah,
assume, right? Regardless if someone has ADHD or not, you still have to talk, right? You still have to communicate with each other, correct?
totally, totally. And but it's a lot harder with someone with ADHD and dyslexia because their brains are going on different tangents. Like I'll have a conversation with my partner and we'll be an hour in and she goes, I don't even know what you're talking about. I have no idea what you're talking about. I've gone off on so many different tangents in my head. I'm like out in left field. She's still sitting there in the main line, just trying to get a conversation going, which is vertical, because they're vertical, right? You've gone off on tangents. I've gone out this way and I've gone out that way and I'm going all over the shop. They're just sitting there going, this guy's a complete lunatic. Yet all of it, if you melted it all down and put it into, a document, it would be very logical. But because it's also, all over the place, it makes it very difficult. So I feel for people that are on the other side of people like myself. I really do. And it's something that those people need to concentrate about as well. But you'll get a lot of negative reaction from people like us because it's innate. It's part of the DNA. I don't know why, but it is.
Let me ask you one final question, John. And this question, I want to give you three wishes when it comes to this one question. Aladdin's genie lamp, okay?
Right. Okay.
What are three things you wish people knew about creating boundaries when it comes to living life with dyslexia or ADHD?
Boundaries. I think that, and I've sort of probably said this already, is one is study it, really understand what it is that you have, that both the superpower and the negative, the kryptonite, understand both of those, and it'll go a long, long way. Because when you understand, let me give you an example. When I did some research, there's a very famous philosopher called Gardner, and Gardner said that there's 8 forms of intelligence. Now he's a guy that's educated, he's a doctorate. You can look him up. I don't think he's alive now. He's been recognised by the famous universities as a modern lateral thinker. I think he's wrong. I think there's thousands of intelligences. If you just took music for an example, music is one of the intelligences. Okay, there's 8. So by studying that and understanding that not everyone's always right and that you have this ability to think outside that box is very powerful. But if you don't study it and don't understand what other people are doing, like Edward de Bono, the 6 thinking hats. There's 6 ways of thinking about stuff. There's the accountant, there's the lawyer, there's, the lateral thinker, there's the businessman, the entrepreneur. He's only got 6 hats or 6 stand shoes. There should be 6,000 of those. You know what I mean? So we all do. So, but you wouldn't know that unless you studied it and understood it. So that's the positive side of it, and then the negative side of it is understanding why do you react in certain ways to certain bits of information. What are you allergic to? What is it that makes you react in certain environments? Understand it and study it. And if you do that, then you'll recognize where you're going wrong and you're falling